Welcome, everybody, to the Cone of Shame Veterinary Podcast. I am your host, Dr. DrAndyRoark. Guys, I got a great one here today with my friend, Matt Salois. He is an economist, formerly with the AVMA and now with the Veterinary Management Groups. We get into the economic forces that are driving our profession right now. Yes, we talk about corporate consolidation. Yes, we talk about private equity money coming into the profession. Yes, we talk about how are these prices on vet practices justified, and how do people plan to make money with this? We talk about rising salaries for doctors and paraprofessionals. We both think that they're great and they're really good. How do they make economic sense? And also, does this mean absolutely 100% that prices are going to have to go up for pet owners? We talk about the fact that the cost of care is increasing by about 10% a year for pet owners. That's a lot. Is that how it has to be? Is that how it's going to be? And finally, we talk about inflation and the possible recession coming up. What do we need to know? How is it going to affect us here in the trenches in vet medicine? Guys, this is a great episode. If you're interested in any of those things, stick around. Matt is super fun, and I'm really glad he talked to us. Let's get into this episode.
This is your show. We're glad you're here. We want to help you in your veterinary career. Welcome to the Cone of Shame with Dr. DrAndyRoark.
Welcome to the podcast, Matt Salois. How are you?
I'm doing great, Andy. Great to see you.
It's great to see you as well. Thanks for being here. For those who do not know you, you introduce yourself as husband, father, economist, in that order. And I think that's wonderful. You have been an economist for the AVMA. You are currently with the Veterinary Management Groups. You are someone who is really known in our industry for having insight as an economist. I put out a social media post a couple of weeks back and said, hey, what is the best lecture that you have seen and who gave it? And you came up on that list. Yes, you did. You were on the list of people that I should talk to. And so take that as the high praise that it should be, is that someone had heard you speak. And honestly, your name came up a couple of times. And so I was like, let's get Matt on here. And I want to talk to you about today about veterinary economics and the general state of finance in vet medicine. This is something I'm really, really interested in. I think a lot of us have kind of taken in the economic position of our profession piecemeal. And I'm kind of hoping you can paint me a more clear picture of what are the major forces and how they're fitting together. And I think I would benefit from that. And I think there's a lot of other people who would really love to have that clarity. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. And, with that praise, I hopefully live up to expectations there and
no pressure.
Offer that clarity. And I got to tell you, I feel like I've made it being on your podcast. It's really an honor. So appreciate it, Andy. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for saying that. No, I'm thanks for saying that. Okay, let me sort of set the stage here. I think most of us in the profession are looking around these big sort of macroeconomic trends that maybe we don't totally understand how they fit together. So the big things that I'm looking at that I just want to sort of crack the ice with you about is increase in corporate ownership of practices. We are seeing this as an ongoing trend. More practices are coming under the ownership of corporations. We're hearing a lot about private equity money coming into vet medicine. And I think a lot of us don't necessarily know what private equity is compared to corporate ownership or what that's like. And then we see practices selling at huge values. So, 20 times their earnings, and veterinarians can't borrow enough money to buy practices. And a lot of people, I think I just want to start at that level and say, can you paint me a picture of what's happening as far as ownership of practices and how that's going and what's driving that?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a good question and a lot to dig into.
It's a big question. I know it's big, but
it's it's big. And I think it's a cascade of trends that we've seen evolve over time. And we could say this with a lot of different things. I think one of the things that COVID escalated was this consolidation in our industry. COVID escalated a lot of things and moved us fast forward in a lot of different directions in different areas of our lives. And this was one area I think most relevant for veterinary medicine. And there's a lot of reasons why. A few I'll touch on here, and we can dig into some of the other areas, is animal health, veterinary medicine has proved itself in the past to be recession resilient. And that's
Mhm.
very attractive to investors across private equity and other aspects of investing, because in periods of economic downturn or sluggishness, investors and those with cash are looking to continue to propagate returns on their money. And veterinary medicine, animal health continues to demonstrate that they are resilient amongst some of those economic headwinds versus other industries. So it's very attractive from that perspective.
Okay.
Other areas, I think, is just the growth of animal health and veterinary medicine over time. We continue to see the population of pets expand. We've continued to see demand for veterinary services and pet care expand. And again, from an investor perspective, that's really attractive. Now, to your point, multipliers, I remember, gosh, it seems like 2018, 2019 was a lifetime ago, though. But I remember having conversations with practice owners around multiples, and they were talking 6, 7, and that seemed absurdly high at the time. And we were saying that won't last; it'll come down. And like you said, 20 is not out of the realm of question here. We've seen that, we've experienced that, and so it just shows, I think, the cascade of these trends. They've amplified, particularly in this current environment that COVID created, which really shot us fast forward on this evolution of consolidation, which, keep in mind, this is not unique to veterinary medicine. It's a natural tendency for a lot of markets and industries to consolidate over time. And you see this in airlines, you see this in healthcare and pharmaceuticals, you see this in automobiles. A lot of different markets and industries do this over time. So there's something very natural about it from an economic perspective. It's not an aberration. It's nothing weird or wrong. The last point I'll make about this, and I believe this a number of years ago, I still believe it today, is that there is room for veterinary practices of all size, of all types of ownership. And I still think that independent practice ownership, there's room for that now and in the future. And aspects and definitions of ownership are changing as well. There's independent 100% ownership, but there's aspects around equity ownership that are new in our profession, or at least new in the last several years. And we can't dismiss those, because those are important avenues of ownership as well.
Oh, I completely agree. And I don't think independent ownership is going away. My position, as I like to say, the future of vet medicine is fragmented, which means there will be big corporate groups, and there will also be tiny little mom and pop groups, and there will be mobile vets, and there will be hospice vets, and there will be people who very much make their own way and own their own thing. I don't think that's going away. I am super pro entrepreneur inside of vet medicine. And that doesn't just mean for veterinarians. Anyway, as an entrepreneur in ways, someone who has a job that didn't exist before I made it, I don't see that going away. I think that there's a lot of opportunity. So I love that. Can you talk to me a little bit? I think the first question I have in this is, help me understand how a company paying 20 times the amount that a practice earns makes any sort of financial sense. So for those of us who just sort of came up and, we made money and we paid our bills, you go, this practice will never earn enough money to justify what it was sold for. How does that work? And so can you just lay down that sort of financial groundwork?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it all comes down to beliefs in the opportunity to grow that practice and expand the profitability and the economic performance of that practice. And that's why you see a lot of that sweet spot in purchase being in some of these medium size practices there, where there's still an opportunity to grow them into larger practices. And that's the lucrative part around this. It's not just the current state of earnings and profitability of that practice. It's the future state that these investors are most interested in. And they have different time horizons. Investors will be very diverse here in that regard. Some are looking for a 2 to 3 year return. Some are in it for the longer haul, looking at things 5, 10 years out. But the outcome is the same. The question that they're asking themselves is the same as, if I buy this now at today's price, what can I then make a profit on when I sell this 3, 5, 10 years out? And that's a lot of the end goal of a lot of private equity there, is they'll buy a private enterprise, they'll invest in it, they'll grow it, and then they're looking to sell it for a return in the not too distant future. With that not too distant being very subjective, depending on the investor.
Correct. Yeah. Do you think so, okay, I hear what you're saying. Do you think that's feasible? Can you really buy this practice? And again, we're speaking in broad generalities, I know, but is it possible to buy this practice and say, I'm going to pay 10 times what this thing earns, and I'm going to grow it to the point that makes sense? I go, that type of growth, especially when it's extremely hard to hire veterinarians and things like that,
Sure.
that seems so difficult to me. I've always thought that this was supposed to make economic sense in rolling these practice orders together and taking them eventually all the way up to where they're, a publicly traded company, something like that. And I go, okay, I can keep pushing these things up until they have stock that people can buy, and the level of return on that can actually justify this. But it's just the idea of buying practices at what they're going for now and trying to grow them to be profitable enough to justify that. Boy, I really struggle with that. Am I off base here?
No, you're not alone. I mean, I'm an economist here, and sometimes I struggle with it, which is why I didn't make a career as an investor. I made a career as an economist, particularly in right. And you don't know many billionaire economists, at least I don't either. So I don't know. Take that with a grain of salt for what it's worth. But that it's a really relevant and pointed question, because I think a lot of people are perplexed. And I'll say, growth can come in different ways. I mean, I think the traditional way is you look at growth and you say, okay, I'm gonna build and expand. I'm gonna add doctors. I'm gonna build more patients into the practice, and that's how we're going to grow. We're going to grow that top line growth through revenue. But there's an equal opportunity in the bottom line growth around creating a more high performing enterprise that maybe you're not necessarily growing that top line revenue, but you see opportunities in the bottom line to make a more efficient, productive business. And if you can make the right investments and make it leaner and smarter, you're still generating a growth in profit. And then the dual win-win comes when you can do both at the same time. That's why you see a lot of mergers and acquisitions is, yes, they see that opportunity to grow the market through demand, but they're also looking at, hey, if we can combine companies and create synergies, we can create a more efficient enterprise and grow through the demand side as well. And that's where a lot of that economic opportunity comes from.
When we start looking at sort of other economic forces that we're seeing in the profession, like we're seeing a rapid increase in salaries of paraprofessionals, which I think is super great. I like to see those things go up. Veterinarians, especially, we have good data on new graduates coming out of school and taking their first job. And boy, those salaries are going up. I mean, they're in the six figures, right out of the gates, and that hasn't been the case in the past. And so I'm looking at those things. Do you see those trends being tied to the type of consolidation or things that we're talking about? Or is that an independent wave that's going through just based on completely different things?
It's related. And first I got to say, I saw a tail. So immediately, like a squirrel, I'm distracted.
Yeah, no,
I love it. I hope the dog pops up there. No, I love it. I hope one of my cats comes in here.
It wasn't my tail. It's my wingman.
Oh, thank goodness. I was worried for a minute there.
You may hear a squeak toy in a minute.
I hope I do. It's related. I think what's driving a lot of that wage growth right now is what you mentioned before around the labor shortage and the very tight labor market we're in. And again, this is one of those things that I would say COVID pushed fast forward. We were in a tight labor market even before the pandemic. And again, I'll bring up anecdotes around asking practice owners before COVID what your biggest challenge is. And they would say hiring or recruiting. And a lot of times it was more around finding the right fit rather than just finding somebody. And now it's just trying to get a warm body into the practice, whether it's a credentialed technician or a DVM. And this is one of those areas that I often will remind everyone to look at both sides of the situation we're in with the labor market, because we talk a lot about it from the employer side and the woes of hiring. And that is concerning because there are some growth barriers that are in place when you can't hire people to fill your business and grow that business. But it's a different story when you are on the labor market, and one that we can't dismiss, right? And so, there's a great article I read. It's out last year. Good news. There's a labor shortage. It's still really relevant, even though it seems like the world is ever changing. And last September feels like a lifetime ago. But it's written by an economist from MIT, really accessible, very digestible. And just a reminder, remember, when you're looking at the labor market, there's two sides of it. There's a demand for labor, which are your employers. And then there's a supply of labor, which you, me, everybody are participants in that. And we need to be mindful of that side, because exactly what you said, what we've seen here through scarcity of labor now more than ever has been an elevation of wages and earnings that, quite frankly, fell behind in many ways, depending on the industry. And veterinary medicine was one of them. If you look at earnings of veterinarians in real terms, accounting for inflation, post 2008 recession, whether you believe it or not, the market responded as if there was a glut of veterinarians. And so wages and earnings of veterinarians was actually falling for a number of years after the recession. And it wasn't till around 2015 or 16 that they started to climb up again. And when you look at the trend line, and the visuals are always the most impactful when you see this, when you look at the trend line of the trajectory earnings for average veterinarian was on pre-08 recession, it wasn't until around 2020, 2021 that it was actually finally starting to reach that trend line again. And so, yes, they've been rising. What I remind everyone is this: we've been on a 10-year market correction journey for quite a while when you go back to that trend line. And secondly, remember, we're in an environment of inflation. So we have to ask ourselves too, are those increases in earnings making up for the increase in expenses there? Because that takes a toll out of your real spending power. And yes, if your earnings are rising 6% per year, that's wonderful. But if the average cost of everything is rising at 10%, your real income is actually declining.
That does make sense. If you dream of doing team training with your team, getting your people together, getting them on the same page, talking about how you guys work together in your practice, I'd love to help you. You can check out DrAndyRoark.com and check out the store. I have 2 different team training courses. These are courses for teams to do together to get on the same page and to talk about how you do things. I have my Angry Clients course and I have my Exam Room Toolkit course, and they are both available and there. Check them out. All right, guys, let's get back into this episode. When we see these sorts of increases in salary that are sort of matching up sort of with the inflationary pressures as well, but I see paraprofessionals salaries going up, and I personally felt that they've been way underpaid. I love how you say look at on both sides and from both directions, because I'm an employer, and then also I am an employee. I'm an associate vet, and I look at technicians and other doctors and say, this kind of has to work for everybody. And so I'm a big fan of balance, and I hear the fears of especially independent practice owners who are going, we need to be competitive and we need to find this money to pay these people. And there's not, I will, if you want to see me quickly reject a theory, tell me that greedy vet practice owners have been sitting on piles of money that they have not been paying their staff, and I will be done with the conversation, because that's just not true, and it's not all what I've seen. It's always I've always seen veterinarians doing their best to keep the business going and to take care of their people while keeping prices low and care affordable for pet owners. That's really the balance and the challenging thing. And so here we are, and we have the price of practices going up, and we have salaries going up. I got to tell you, Matt, I have concerns, and I talk about this with a lot of different guests in a lot of different ways about, does this mean that a significant increase in the cost of care is inevitable for pet owners?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I love what you just said. And there were so many great things that you just touched on. I'm going to try and see if my 40-plus-year-old brain can keep up with what you just laid out there. But, first, I want to touch on the support professionals and our credentialed technicians and practice managers and all of it, because you're right. We've seen wages and earnings for them particularly escalate in the last 12 months, rise in a way that they've needed to. And I have to ask myself as an economist, never in the last 12 to 18 months have we probably saw as much in the trade literature and had conversations around fairly paid technicians and others. And I have to wonder, would we have had those conversations if it wasn't for COVID and for the labor market situation that we're in? And this is one of those things where good news, there's a labor shortage, because finally you start to realize the opportunity that these types of professionals provide and the need to economically reward them in a way that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And yet, to your point as well, it's challenging around the markets. They all compete with one another. So a technician doesn't have to stay in veterinary medicine. If there's an economic opportunity that's better, they can work elsewhere. My wife, do you travel much on the road? Do you take many road trips, Andy, with you or your family?
I have geared down since the pandemic. I have intentionally geared down, but boy, there was a in 2016, I think was the most I traveled. I was on the road about 125 days out of the year.
Oh, wow. That's intense. Well, My wife and my family live in Florida. We live in Illinois. So we like to take road trips down there to see them. And we're still old school. We drive. But we encountered, my wife took a picture. There's this, I call it a gas station. It's so much more called Buc-ee's. And there's Bucky the Beaver that you go on these billboards and you see him. And there's just like these massive havens, like these gorgeous restrooms, right? Which you wouldn't think of that for a rest stop, and like hundreds of different kinds of beef jerky. The beaver, Bucky the Beaver is around like a Disney character greeting people. It's just an amazing experience. And she sent me a sign inside one of the Buc-ee's. She finally decided to stop and see what all this was about because we've driven by it for years and never gone in. And then there was a sign. It was an employment opportunity, recruiting staff line workers, $30 an hour. And I saw that and I thought, wow. So here we are, not to trivialize, Buc-ee's or gas stations and rest stops, but that how wonderful. But it demonstrates the scarcity of labor in a really critical way. And it just, for me, technicians, they're recruiting everywhere, inside, outside veterinary medicine. We have to be not just competitive for ourselves in veterinary medicine, but we got to be competitive across other opportunities that technicians, managers, and all the support professionals have available outside veterinary medicine. So it's so critically important. And then the third piece in your comment around the affordability, we absolutely have to keep that front and center. Typically, what we saw historically, the average cost of veterinary care was rising about 3%-ish a year, pretty much in tune with national inflation. The average practice might look like that. Other practices might be different depending on what they were doing with their pricing strategies. But now we're looking at 9-10% increase in average veterinary services. And this is data coming from I've seen from Vet Success that they've shared before at industry conferences. And the rule of 72, which is an old rule, but if you ever heard it, at a 7.2% interest rate in 10 years, the price of something doubles. And so here we are above that, and we're looking at the price of veterinary services in an average way, more than doubling, right, in 10 years. And that's concerning, right? And this, to me, when you look at the matter of the labor shortage, this is really important, because when we think about strategically what we need to do as a profession to address these issues, and I know we need more DVMs, we need more technicians, and we needed them more before COVID. But if we respond to the shortage by, opening the floodgates and rapidly expanding the supply of professionals, we all know the biggest cost center in any veterinary practice is its labor, for good reason. I mean, most businesses are like that, but all health professions are like that, because these are highly trained, educated professionals that deliver complicated services. But that's going to go directly into providing or raising a barrier to the affordability of care, which has to be on our minds. And I think it is, but it's one that we've got to be really careful about in terms of what we do in our profession, how we respond to this tight labor market we're in, and balancing that with the affordability of care so that pet care, and more specifically veterinary care, doesn't become for the elite only. That access to all remains, because it's so important.
Yeah, that's really important to me. Is that I do not want to make pet ownership classist. I don't want to make it so that only people with significant resources can have pets. That bothers me at a moral fundamental level. Help me understand this from an economic standpoint. How unique is veterinary medicine this way? Okay. Because I think a lot about, I understand basic economics and supply and demand. And I trust me, I get that stuff. Are there other industries out there really that are deeply focused on keeping their product accessible to as many people as possible? So for example, let's magic wand. And we as a profession are no longer doing pet healthcare. We're selling high-end cars. Well, you go, okay, we have more work than we can do. The demand for our services is through the roof and growing. We can't get enough laborers. The obvious answer is you just raise the price. You raise the price of your service until the demand is pressed down enough that you have enough supply to meet that demand. So when supply is down, the demand goes up. When the demand goes up, we can increase prices and try to bring that down. But we morally, because we don't sell high-end cars, we sell pets. Right. I am unwilling to just turn that knob and increase the price of my services until the demand falls down to a place that we can meet it. Is that as big an anomaly as I imagine it being, or is that more common in other industries than I'm thinking of?
Yeah. I think you're a hidden economist, Andy. Here, there's you get it. Yeah, that's good. I wish I was a hidden veterinarian, but I am not at all. I just work in veterinary medicine, which I love. Yes, so a lot of commonalities, I'd say. I mean, a lot. The market we're in is in many ways similar to a lot of other markets, particularly other healthcare markets, right? But I think there are some differences here that are worth drawing out. And another funny anecdote. One of them is this, and I was drawing parallels to the dental industry and the dental profession with a good friend and colleague, Dr. Peter Weinstein, and we were trading thoughts and ideas, and we were differing on something. I can't remember what it was, but he said, Matt.
Peter likes to argue. He likes. He's been on the show many times. He will take your position and be contrary to it.
And he's good at it, right? Which is why I like to argue with him in a friendly way. And he said, Matt, here's the difference. Nothing dies in a dental practice. You're right. Nothing does. Hopefully not, right? But we are dealing with lives here, and lives are saved in a veterinary practice, not to be overly dramatic. And the connection that people have with their pets is visceral, and it's real, and it's tangible. We saw that now more than ever throughout the course of the pandemic. And like you said, we're not a market selling McLarens here. I don't even know I've seen a McLaren on the road, but I know they exist. There are few things as ubiquitous as pet ownership in the United States. It is ubiquitous, and that has to matter. And so it doesn't mean that within veterinary medicine that you can't cater or define a niche, whether it's affordable veterinary care or some posh elite service that's catering to the wealthy and the elite. There's nothing wrong with that. The challenge becomes when the market is dedicated to servicing a sole ladder on the economic ladder of society. And that's problematic because of the ubiquity of pet ownership.
Okay. That makes sense to me. Looking into your crystal ball and saying, okay, these are the market forces that we're looking at. How do pet owners continue to afford services? I think there's two pieces of this, right? Like, how do we keep services affordable? But I think they're destined to go up because everything is kind of going up. Is the only answer to move into an insurance model, or are there other economic models that in other industries have provided some relief and kept goods and services affordable?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. And I think two sides of it, right? What can the pet owner do? And then what can we do as organized veterinary medicine to support more affordable veterinary care? And you named it from the pet owner side, exploring options like pet insurance, wellness care plans, budgeting for veterinary care like you would groceries or mortgage. The behavior aspects of this, as an economist, to me, say people will always be challenged to do that, right? Savings, for example, American households have never saved as they've needed to in order to have, the great retirement that we all dream of. So there are some significant behavioral challenges there in putting it on the pet owner, but there are definitely things the pet owner can do to manage the cost of veterinary care. From the perspective of the profession, there are things that we can do. And, I think we could take another hour for that question alone. But if anyone's heard me talk, knows that I'm a big proponent and advocate for efficiency and productivity. And it is the saving grace. And I've learned to be careful in touching on that concept because rightfully so, a veterinarian may remind me of, don't tell me to be more productive. I've never worked harder in my life. And it's so true.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so true. And here's the tragic irony around inefficiency is that it's hidden and you don't often see it. And you can work harder, but not get more done if you're facing barriers to productivity that remain hidden and out of sight. And I think COVID was a good reminder of that we saw barriers to productivity come up. Curbside care, deep cleaning exam rooms between patient visits, only allowing a certain number of patients and clients in an office, in a hospital, so many things. And some of these things have come and gone, and some things have lingered. And that took a hit effectively to the average number of patients that a hospital or a typical full-time DVM could see in a given hour or a given week. And the way that you compensate for low productivity is you work longer hours and you burn your people out. And I think that's what we're seeing here, is that burnout be pushed out even further because we're having to work harder to accommodate these barriers to efficiency. So I akin it to this. The average veterinary professional was used to running a mile on a treadmill and could do that and wake up early in the morning and run that mile on a treadmill and be fine, barely break a sweat because they were proficient, they were good at it. And then COVID came and took them off that treadmill and put them on the beach, where it's a lot harder to run that mile. And they're being asked to run a little bit further because of the demand increases that we saw for veterinary care. And by the way, there's COVID and a pandemic and everything else. So it's like you're running that extra mile and there's a hurricane throwing heavy wind and rain on you. It's a miserable situation, right? So what improving efficiency and productivity does is take you off that caustic, stormy beach and back onto the treadmill that you know and you love and you're proficient at. And that's why it's so important to focus on that.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a great answer. The idea that we can be more efficient and there are systems for productivity that we can put in place. I'm a huge believer in that. I'm an optimistic person, but I also believe in innovation and ingenuity. I think that there are things that we can do to do this better and make it work. Not just, sorry, prices are going to keep going up and we're going to keep doing exactly what we're doing. And pet owners are going to have to figure it out, whether it's insurance or savings or whatever. I very much think that you're right on it as far as, in the history of humankind, we have continually figured out how to do it better, how to make things more accessible, how to make things work. And so that's what I needed to hear. That leaves me with a smile on my face. As you look into your crystal ball here, and I want to wrap up on this. We have increased inflation. We have the Fed is raising interest rates and making the cost of borrowing money higher and things to sort of try to slow things down. It's if it's a recession that we're in, it's a weird recession. Where do you see this going in vet medicine? If you had to sort of go on record and say, 12 to 18 months out from here, this is kind of some of the changes that I expect that we'll be feeling. What would those be?
Yeah, I think I'd say don't worry so much about it.
I like that. That makes
there are a couple of reasons. Part of it is what will come, what will come. And I'm a big believer in worrying about those things that are in your circle of influence and those things that are not, do not. But it doesn't mean don't be prepared, right? Sure. And headlines always have a way of heightening emotions. And that's the purpose of headlines, I think, is to grab your attention and get you to read it and get an emotional response. But I think, are we in a recession or not? It's not the right question that we're asking ourselves for a couple of reasons. And while we've seen 2 straight quarters of negative growth, and that's sort of the formal definition of a recession, negative growth in our gross domestic product, GDP, those numbers are always preliminary. And they won't even be formal numbers for at least another 6 to 9 months. So we won't even know whether it's true for that amount of time. But we're in a really different situation than a lot of other previous recessions. In some way that leaves most economists scratching their head, is we've got this slowing economic growth that we're seeing, but we've got this red hot labor market that's at play here. And we've never experienced that. And so typically when you think about an economic downturn, like a recession or something worse, that's always matched with an inability to find a job. And declining wages and earnings, right? And we're not really seeing that. Yes, we've got inflation, and that's an issue. We need to be really focused on that, and the Fed is doing that, which is great. The Federal Reserve, but I would say whether or not we're in a recession is not the most relevant question because of that reason. Are you gainfully employed? Are you worried about losing your job? Are you worried about your earnings falling, your household income falling? I think those are the relevant questions there. And the other thing to remind everybody is that we're in a weird situation in our economy. Never have we been in something like this. What others have called slowing growth, or negative growth, I call it slowing, stabilizing, normalizing is probably the word I most prefer. Is we saw these epic rises in demand, veterinary services, and just economic growth generally last year, resulting from the pandemic. And what we have to remind ourselves is those epic highs were never intended or meant to last. They were artificial for a number of reasons. Pent-up demand drove increased demand in 2021 because people couldn't spend in 2020. So they were in 2021. Economic stimulus, 3 major payments went out in 2021, giving households a lot of extra cash. And so that was driving it. And then people were spending more time at home. And this was a big factor with veterinary care. But people are returning to work more normally. And so paring back on some of that spending because it's less front of mind there. And so we're kind of in this, what others have called the everything is weird economy. And I've heard it called the pinched hose economy too. So if you think about, if you ever as a kid and you pinched a hose tight and then, the water built up and you let it go and the hose would flap about. That's kind of what our economy has been doing. It got pinched because of COVID, then let go. And we're working through all of this pent up economic activity here that's creating volatility. A lot of it's cyclical, which is hard to see when you're experiencing it now, but we're going to be able to reflect back in 18 to 24 months and say, I remember that. That was crazy, but things are more normal now.
Yeah, all of that makes so much sense. I really love the pinched hose metaphor. That really works for me. Man, that's perfect. That really makes me feel good. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. I'm going to have to sit and process that a little bit. I am going to track down good news. There's a labor shortage. I'll put a link in the show notes for those who want to see it. Other resources that you recommend just in general for understanding economics or economics in veterinary medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. So I won't take credit for that pinched hose economy. Someone else wrote that. You can Google it. And there's a great article talking about that as well. Very accessible and digestible. I like Inside Economics. It's a great podcast if you're willing to invest the time. A funny bunch of economists come together and have a deep dive on different economic issues. Lots of other resources out there. But I would just say, find what you like and that's accessible and enjoy listening and reading to it. And if you don't, move on to the next one.
That's awesome. Matt, where can people find you online if they want to see some of the stuff that you're writing and things that you're doing?
Yeah, thanks. If you want to see pictures of cats and kids and food, I have an Instagram account that's probably of no interest. But I try to be active on LinkedIn as well, posting thoughts about veterinary medicine, economics more generally, and an occasional bad dad joke here and there too.
I'm going to tune in for that. Matt, thanks so much for being here. Guys, take care of yourselves and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much. Great being here.
And that is our show, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. As always, if you're thinking about doing some team training and you'd like to run some training that your team is going to enjoy and jump in together and get on the same page about how to do things with, I'd love to help you. Check out my courses. I have an Angry Client course and I have a exam room communication toolkit course. And both of them are meant to be done by groups together. Head over to DrAndyRoark.com. I'll put links in the show notes. But man, I'd love for you to see what we do and how we do it. And I'd love to help you have a better practice. Anyway, gang, take care of yourselves. I'll talk to you soon.